Okay, so this is the European History Brief Lecture for Wednesday, 10th March 2021. Um, we did corrections of the quiz and exam, notes and simulation rules and movie worksheet rules are being passed around the room as I speak. And everyone should have three things, therefore: notes, simulation rules, and a movie worksheet. We start with what happens when the war begins, which is everyone attacks. The French attack into the Vosges Mountains of Alsace-Lorraine as part of their Plan 17. And that gets bogged down because the Germans are prepared for it. Remember the movie worksheets too, which seems to be coming. Good. You three in the middle have it? Okay. The Russians attack more quickly than anyone expects into East Prussia, causing a bit of an alarm. But in the end, their attack is ground to a halt. The big surprise is the attack by the Germans on the Western Front in harmony with their Schlieffen Plan. And this is the attack not directly into France from Alsace-Lorraine, but into Belgium and Luxembourg. Because from Belgium and Luxembourg, they can gain access to a less fortified northeastern French border. When the Germans trundle into Belgium, this exercises the British, who had been thinking about sitting out the war. There was a real chance, had Belgian neutrality not been violated, that the British might have found an excuse not to join the fighting with their French and Russian allies. But because the Belgians were being victimized and the British had promised them security in a treaty, and because the Germans could not imagine anyone going to war over a, quote, scrap of paper, unquote, there's a miscalculation here that has major consequences. The miscalculation is the Schlieffen Plan violates German neutrality, and the Germans are told by the British, if you don't evacuate your troops from Belgium within 48 hours, we're going to be at war. And the Germans will call their bluff. But it's not a bluff. The British go to war, and they send their high-quality but small expeditionary force into Belgium just to try to stop the Germans. Now, Germany is to this side of my arm. France, Paris are here. Belgium is here. The current head of the German General Staff has already altered the Schlieffen Plan. He's reduced the size of the attack through the Low Countries, negating the need to go through Holland as well as Belgium. Now, this is going to keep Holland neutral, but it is also going to weaken the German attack. Instead, those troops are sent to the eastern frontier to be a surety against more aggressive than expected Russian attack. When the attack comes, the Germans are moving from Germany through Belgium into France like a giant wheel. Like a giant wheel. Now, if you've ever run track, you understand, or if you've ever watched a car race, that the people on the outer edge of the turns have to travel farther than the people on the inner edge of the turns. So the people near the axle of the German wheel achieve their victory conditions fairly easily. But the people on the outer edge of the wheel, which is the German First Army, they have to travel farther, faster, and attack more aggressively and more successfully than anyone else so far in the war, which they begin to do. But then about halfway through Belgium, the British Expeditionary Force meets the Germans at the Mons Canal. The Germans at first don't think much of the British because they're such a tiny army. But when I say that the British man for man are the best soldiers on earth in 1914, I ain't just a woofing. I am telling you the absolute truth. When the Germans encounter the British at Mons, they think they're under heavy, concentrated machine gun fire. The German attack for the first time in the war withers, and then withers again because of the volume of accurate bullets hitting Germans and killing them or knocking them out of the fight. Well, it's not machine guns. It is aimed British rifle fire. Because the British Army is volunteer and so small, they can be very picky. So their men are marksmen. And they're not only good at hitting targets, they're good at hitting targets in rapid fire. And the Lee Enfield is a particularly good weapon for a bolt-action rifle for rapid fire, accurate fire. So the German first and second waves at Mons get stopped. Finally, the Germans level artillery at the British, and the British are forced to retreat. Artillery in World War I is the queen of battle. You're there in shirts and trousers with a rifle, and massive explosive shells are hitting around you, sending shrapnel through the air. It's not a good place to be. So artillery, for most of the war, is the deciding factor in a lot of battles. So the British withdraw, and the Germans continue in. However, because the Russian attack is so unexpectedly quick and strong into East Prussia, the head of the German General Staff panics and sends an army corps from the Wheeling attack east to meet the Russians. In a move that should tell you that dithering is not necessarily a good idea in any plan of action, really, you got to keep that. The Army Corps is not there in the attack on France, where it really, really, really could have been useful. But it doesn't arrive in the east in time for the decisive battles there. Notice. So instead, what happens is that corps is useless in these attacks. Both of them. Okay, the German attack is wheeling towards Paris. But the First Army cannot keep up. They begin to fall behind. And resistance down here seems to begin to stiffen. Paris is placed under the command of a wiry old general named Gallieni, who conscripts all of the motor vehicles in Paris, particularly the taxis, and loads the troops onto these Paris taxis and sends them to where the French and British are concentrating at the Marne River. Because they can't keep up, the German First Army, instead of going around Paris, which is the whole point of the attack, for the First Army to go around Paris, cut Paris off from the rest of France, Paris gets enveloped, France surrenders just like in 1870-71. But they can't do it. They cannot keep up. And the fact that that corps was taken away makes things even worse. So instead of sweeping to the east of Paris and cutting it off, to the west of Paris and cutting it off, the First Army is going to join the rest of the army wheeling to the west of Paris. To the east of Paris. Getting east and west confused because I'm trying to do it from your perspective. They were supposed to go to the west of Paris. They're going to the east of Paris. They were supposed to cut Paris off. Instead, they are going to sweep past Paris. Gallieni's Paris taxis and the rest of the French and British gather at the Marne, west of Paris. And here the Germans hit a British and French defense that does not retreat when hit with artillery. Up until now, the Germans, with their superior howitzers, had always been able to drive the British and French away. Not here. In a 3-day grinding battle, the British and French at the First Battle of the Marne hold the line. So the Germans have failed to seal Paris off, they failed to cut it off, and they have failed to destroy the French and British armies in the field, and the British are decisive in all of this. So the Schlieffen Plan has failed. This all happens in the first 5 to 6 weeks. World War I begins in early August, around August 1st, and the Battle of the Marne is in early September. Now, this period of time is captured extremely well in the popular history book, The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. If you ever want to read a well-written history book that's a page-turner, that keeps you wondering what's going to happen next. And this is at a time when everyone knew how World War I turned out. Still, she, with her writing ability, creates a tension in the reader. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And it's a wonderful book. It's a page turner, and it's about this first month during the attack up to the Battle of the Marne. But now, what happens is the German army is here in the midst of France, and it's now going to be a race to the sea. So the French and British start moving northward to try to flank the Germans. And the Germans start moving northward to try to avoid that. And they're basically slap fighting with armies all the way up to the coast of the North Sea. The last big battle of this early phase is the Battle of Ypres, which is the last part of Belgium in Flanders that is not occupied by the Germans. Only a tiny tip of Flanders is left of Belgium. It's the city of Ypres. Hitler is actually personally part of the attack that goes into Ypres to try to get the British out. They fail. British and the Belgians hold the line at Ypres, and so now there is a solid line between the sea and the Swiss border. It looks basically like a big S, and this big S is going to be the Western Front. And what happens is, once the front is established, everyone digs in, because the safest place in a battlefield with rifles is underground or behind ground. Earth is a hell of a bullet stopper. So you dig trenches, you fortify them with barbed wire and minefields, you place machine guns along them. The British and French trenches are supposed to be temporary. They're not very deep, they're not very extensive, because the British and French are still politically committed to driving the Germans out of Belgium and France. However, the German trenches are much deeper, much more extensive, especially at first. Their barbed wire and mine defenses are exquisite, and their machine guns and artillery protecting them. Why? Because the Germans are now going to reverse their battle plan. The battle plan under Schlieffen's idea had been destroy France and then go after Russia. France is not destroyed. The British are involved. It's going to be a long war. So they dig in on the defense, holding a lot of French and Belgian territory in the west. They're going to use their attacking forces against Russia in the east. And that's going to pay off for them big time in future years. So now we're on the stalemated Western Front. We've got trench lines on both sides. In the game, we've got 4 teams. This group of people, this group of people, that group of people in back, and you get people at these tables over here. Each team are the officers and non-commissioned officers, the sergeants and corporals, of a platoon of about 50 soldiers. Each cube represents 5 soldiers. Your 4 platoons are going to be part of a big push. So you're looking at the simulation rules now. Page 2. You are part of an offensive of hundreds of thousands of men to cross no man's land, the moonscape between the trenches, and attack the German lines. But your generals are being clever. Instead of attacking across the shortest distance directly, you're doing what's called an echelon attack. You're going diagonally across. You're actually going to take more time to cross because this will confuse the Germans. Your goal, if your platoon reaches the enemy command bunker, an underground headquarters that may have some secret papers, if you reach the enemy command bunker, you win. If you don't, you don't. The game is going to work thusly. I'm going to call your team up, and I'll show you where you are, and your teams can move about yay far. I'll show you what cover is available within your range and what risk you'll be taking. You decide how to move from cover to cover. You do not want to stop out or be stopped in the open. That is bad. Yeah. Best cover on the board is this ruined brook, this bridge. The worst place on the board is this crossroads because every artillery gun for miles around uses that as its 0 point, so everyone knows exactly where it is. You don't want to go there. You've got an orchard, ruined farmhouse, the ruined brook, crossroads. You've got various craters. You've got minefields that you know about because they're yours. You don't know where the enemy minefields are. You've got your barbed wire, The enemy has their barbed wire, and that's the system. Don't worry, it'll make sense once we play for a while. You will see each term, depending upon whether you get what you roll, what is going to happen. And I will apply a positive or negative modifier, depending upon how well I think you're using cover. So that's the game. We'll see how it goes. Those of you at home can work on other things. Thank you for your attention.